The Carpenter and the Cradle, a History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Worden, read by the author. Chapter 34. It was a rough, uncomfortable night for Ko, presumably for Limo as well. Ko slept fitfully, even when it wasn't his turn to sit out at the mouth of the cave feeding wood into the fire, or going off in search of the scarce fuel of twigs and larger fallen branches. There was more protection from the elements in the cave than out of it, but barely. It was a long, cold night, and the hollow feeling in his belly didn't help him settle down to sleep. The meal of one small, skinny grouse split between the two men, though Ko had surreptitiously given a larger share to his father, didn't go far. In the last fading light of the day, Ko had been lucky to spot the grouse hiding in the tall grass of the meadow. He knew that grouse were stupid and slow enough that he could get it with one careful throw of a rock, as long as he didn't miss, and he hadn't. So there had been a meal for the two men, but it wasn't enough to fill the empty spaces. And then, just as the day began to dawn, the rain started. It started as a light sprinkle, but the sky bore signs of pouring down in a short time. Quickly, Ko transported the meager pile of dry wood into the cave. The fire was sheltered in the overhang of the cave mouth, but if he and Limo decided to wait out the rain in the cave, they'd want a much larger supply. Possibly they'd be here for another night. If he hurried, he could dash to the stand of trees on the far side of the meadow and find the dead wood scattered there while it was still reasonably dry. He returned with the largest armful he could carry just as the downpour began. Limo was sitting by the coals of the fire, rubbing his hands briskly over them. "It will be very wet walking through the underbrush today if this keeps up," he observed to his son. "Maybe we should wait until it stops and the sun comes out." "We'll see. You're wet. Come and warm yourself." Ko shivered a little as the two of them stared into the embers. To preserve the wood, they'd let the fire nearly die before adding more wood. "Should I go look for food for us?" Ko asked. "No, not yet. If you get chilled, it will be too hard to warm up. We can wait and see what the day holds. Wouldn't be the first time if we don't eat today. No young warrior fears hunger, but takes it in stride." Ko said nothing. He didn't want to mention that it was Limo who was unaccustomed to hunger in his later years, and that he was more concerned to find food for his father than for himself. "To get your mind off your belly and pass the time, I'll teach you something. It's time you learned it." Limo broke the silence suddenly to say, "Come over here. Bring a light with you. You'll need to be able to see it." Limo moved to the far wall of the small cave room. Ko built up the fire and used it to ignite the birch bark torch he'd made the night before. In his hand, Limo had a twig with a charred end, and he began drawing lines on the cave wall. "The sacred symbols," Ko murmured. "Yes, it's time you began learning them. You may have a wife and son of your own not many seasons from now. You'll need to know these designs. You'll need to pass on the knowledge of them to your own son. You can get started learning them. Think of the sacred pieces of the council chamber to help you remember them. Here's a stick for you. Trace them in the dirt over and over until you know them from memory perfectly." Obediently, Ko began copying his father's drawings in the clay of the cave floor. The 7 symbols on the 7 pieces of furniture that resided in the council chamber. The 8th, and most sacred, article, the cradle, held the 8th symbol as well as the other 7. Ko rubbed all the symbols out when he'd finished and tried drawing them again without looking at his father's handiwork to see how well he could remember them. "I think I've got them," he told his father after a time of working in silent concentration. "You think you've got them because you could do them without looking one time? They'll be gone from your head before the end of the day. You're not finished. Keep going. We have time on our hands, so you might as well use it wisely." Ko repeated his exertions until he was thoroughly bored of the exercise. But he knew better than to ask his father if he could be allowed to stop. When Limo decided Ko had had enough, he'd tell him. Still, perhaps his father could be distracted into giving him a break. "But what do the drawings mean?" he asked after finishing the 8 symbols for what seemed like an endless number of times. Limo looked sternly ahead and said nothing for a long moment. "The meaning is sacred. Our people don't talk of it," he said finally with a warning in his tone. Ko interpreted the words to mean that his father had never been taught their meaning. And sudden curiosity sprang up in him like the flames that licked the birch bark of the torch. There in the thin band of light were unmistakable drawings on the cave wall that Rex's fall had exposed by pulling away the wall of loose clay that covered it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Maylie counted aloud, gingerly brushing away the clay clinging to the wall to uncover the drawings as best she could. Her voice was shaking. No one scolded her for her scream on seeing the pictographs. The rest hadn't reacted vocally, but they were all awestruck. The same thought had come into everyone's mind that perhaps they were seeing ancient cave drawings from the original inhabitants of the land. "What do you think the symbols mean?" June whispered to no one in particular. "Do you think they're connected somehow to this cradle we keep hearing about?" Coral voiced her question a little louder than June's. "That's not a bad thought, Coral. Didn't that nurse say something about a drawing, something like a cradle, and it had designs on it? I think she mentioned something that looked like a moon and stars in the design. This one certainly looks like it contains a moon and stars," Paul said, pointing. "But how could Georgie possibly have any connection to all this? This could be a discovery that's worth a lot to someone. If these really are ancient, the way I'm imagining, this could be really big news. Huge. Maybe that's what this business is all about," Paul speculated. "But how could Georgie have known this was here? How could anyone? That clay that hit the back wall looked like it accumulated naturally over time. I don't know, I'm just guessing, but seeing the floor slopes down toward the back, maybe that dirt shelf was from sediment that built up every time the cave flooded when it rains hard. Over a long period of time, maybe centuries. I don't know, thousands of years, who knows? It was just the accident of Rex's weight on it that crumpled it away. I mean, not that Rex's weight on it was an accident, but it was a lucky find we never would have known was here if Rex hadn't crawled up to peer through the opening in the back. Surely no one else could know those drawings are here," April thought out loud. Practical July jumped in. "But the question is, no, 2 questions really. What do we do about this discovery, and what do we do about Georgie? This doesn't seem to help much with the reason we came here in the first place. I don't see how Georgie could be connected to ancient drawings in a cave. If they're ancient, that is. And even if they do have something to do with her, there's nothing here that tells us where she is or what's happened to her." "Right, July," her dad answered her. "I think we should head back down right away. We'll be lucky to make it back to the campsite before dark, so we'll need to spend the night there and then head home as soon as possible in the morning. We can talk about it, toss some ideas around as to how this might affect Georgie and her situation to decide if we want to make this public. Involve some experts, maybe. I have some contacts I could get a hold of who could check it out quietly. Knowledgeable people. They could give us their opinion as to what we're looking at here and from what era. Maybe it's not ancient cave art at all, who knows? But you're right, Georgie is our first priority. I just don't know how to move forward from here in finding her." "Anyone with their phone? We should at least get a few pictures," April suggested. Will was the only one who'd taken his phone on the trek up the mountain, so he snapped a few shots of the drawings and the group exited the cave and hurried back to the meadow, slipping and sliding on the steep slope back to the valley. The walk up Victoria's Peak and then back down to the base camp was going to feel very long with the rush they were in. Coral was mostly silent during the walk back down, her brain busy with its own tumbling thoughts. Finally, she had a chance to get close enough to Will to hold a quiet conversation with him. "Did some of those drawings look familiar to you?" she asked him. "No, should they have?" he responded, not bothering to keep his voice low to match hers. "They reminded me of the pieces of furniture we found underground." She said no more and let Will ponder her suggestion. "Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Those symbols they had carved into them. I can't remember exactly what the symbols looked like, but you could be on to something." "But if that's the case, well, we know that the pieces of furniture, or whatever they were, that we found in that underground room weren't ancient. We found that modern shoe print along with them. And the lock on the entrance, it was old, but not ancient. And then someone came and took the furniture away. I hate to burst anyone's bubble that we might have an archaeological find here, but I kind of doubt it, given the other find. But I don't know what to think about it all. It's all super weird. I don't know how much to say to the rest." Will nodded. "I'll need to think about it. We should probably tell Paul about that incident and take him to the place and show him everything, even though the pieces are missing now. See what he thinks." "Rain's stopping," Lemo announced. The sudden appearance of the sun lit up the mouth of the cave and created shadows in the interior. "We should head back soon if the rain stays away," he continued. Ko was more than willing. A warrior from the Order of the Guardians may not complain about his hunger or tiredness, but that didn't mean he didn't feel it. He imagined his father was in the same boat, never mind the strength he always exhibited. It came to Ko with a shock that his view of his father was changing. He never could have associated the man with weakness of any kind. But Lemo was growing older, and so was Ko. It wouldn't be long before Ko had surpassed the older man in strength and skill he tried not to admit to himself. "Should I try to find a meal for us before we walk?" he asked his father. Lemo grunted. "If you wish. But hurry, we don't want to be long. The sun will soon have the droplets off the vegetation and then we won't have to get wet walking, but we don't want to wait so long that it starts raining again." Neither made any mention of the group of men that had left them behind. That would have been humiliating to his father, but Ko couldn't help wondering what had become of the group, and the enemy stranger. A traitorous thought crept into his mind that perhaps it wouldn't be the worst thing if the man escaped entirely. Perhaps they'd been wrong, and he wasn't an enemy stranger, just a commoner who had previously known nothing about their perpetual warfare, nor the groups who engaged in it. "I'll be back soon," Ko said, quickly ducking out of the mouth of the cave and setting off in the direction of the spring. Thirst was beginning to outweigh hunger, he noticed. Maybe he'd find food by the water source as well.